Deep in the heart of Africa, where the river winds like an ancient serpent, there's a story so dark, so twisted, that it's been hidden for generations. It's a tale of wrath, revenge, and a goddess who had the power to drown an entire village in her fury. But why? What could a single community have done to anger a river goddess so much that her vengeance would leave them lost to time? This isn't just a myth. It's a legend that has been passed down in hushed whispers, a warning to anyone who dares to defy the forces of nature. And today, we're going to uncover the truth behind this chilling African folktale, one that involves a goddess, an entire village, and an act of retribution that shook the very foundations of the earth. But be warned, this story is not for the faint of heart. Are you ready to dive into the depth of this dark legend and explore the mystery of a river goddess who punished an entire village? Stick with me till the end, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about African mythology. Before we start, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, so you don't miss out on more powerful and forgotten legends from the heart of Africa. Chapter 1: The Village and the River's Sacred Power. In the days long past, before the world became divided by borders and nations, there was a village that sat peacefully beside one of the most powerful rivers in all of Africa. It was a small community, known for its closeness to nature, its deep spiritual roots, and its profound respect for the gods and goddesses who watched over them. This river wasn't just a source of water, it was the lifeblood of the village. The villagers depended on it for everything: fishing, drinking, washing, and even for spiritual practices. To them, the river was sacred, a manifestation of an ancient deity who protected and nurtured the land. But, like many ancient myths, the river's power was not something that could be taken lightly. The people knew that the goddess of the river was a force to be reckoned with, beautiful, powerful, and at times, dangerously unpredictable. They revered her, offering her gifts of fruit, flowers, and prayers, ensuring that their connection to her remained strong and their existence unhindered. For as long as they stayed on her good side, the goddess would protect them. But if they crossed her, if they angered her, the consequences would be catastrophic. And so the villagers lived with an unspoken rule, never to disturb the sacred waters, never to test the goddess, and never to anger the force that flowed beneath the surface of the river. But like all legends, it only takes one moment of defiance to change everything. The events that would unfold began when a young, ambitious leader took charge of the village. His name was Ikena, a man who believed that the old traditions were too limiting. The river had provided for them for generations, but Ikena believed it was time to assert the village's dominance over nature, to tame the wild forces that had kept them in check for so long. He was a visionary, some said a man who dreamed of greatness, and for that, he was willing to take risks. It started innocently enough. Ikena ordered the villagers to build a dam across the river to control its flow. He promised them that the dam would bring prosperity, preventing flooding and allowing them to irrigate their crops more effectively. The villagers, though wary, followed his lead, hoping that this would lead to a new era of wealth and stability. But what they didn't realize was that they were not just taming the river, they were provoking the goddess who lived within it. For days, the villagers worked tirelessly, their hands cutting through the earth and placing stones to redirect the flow of water. But as the dam neared completion, strange things began to happen. The river, which had always been calm and gentle, began to swell. At night, the winds howled through the trees, and strange, echoing noises could be heard from the depths of the water. The village elders, who had warned against such actions, were uneasy. They felt the anger of the goddess rising in the air, but Ikena was undeterred. It wasn't long before the river began to show its true power. The first signs of the goddess' wrath were subtle: small fish washed up on the shores, their bodies twisted and bloated, a sign of unnatural death. The villagers thought little of it at first, dismissing it as a natural occurrence. But when the crops began to wither, and the once vibrant trees by the river began to die, even the most skeptical among them started to wonder. They had defied something ancient, something that could not be controlled or manipulated. Ikena, still determined to complete his vision, ordered the final phase of the dam's construction. But as the last stones were put in place, a violent storm broke out over the village. The wind screamed like the wails of an angry spirit, and the once gentle river turned into a roiling mass of waves. Water surged over the banks, flooding the village. Homes were torn apart, livestock swept away, and the land itself seemed to be in agony. The goddess had been awakened, and her fury was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen. But this was only the beginning. Chapter 2: The Rat Unleashed, a Curse on the Village. As the storm raged on, the villagers scrambled to protect themselves, but there was no escaping the goddess' fury. It wasn't just the physical destruction of their homes that terrified them, it was the sense that something far more malevolent was at work. The once pristine river, which had been the lifeblood of their existence, had now become a torrent of destruction, and the goddess' wrath seemed endless. By the time the storm subsided, the village had been reduced to rubble. The once lush green lands, fertile and abundant, were now covered in mud and debris. But it was what came next that would haunt the villagers for generations. The waters did not recede as expected. Instead, they remained high, flooding the fields, turning crops into stagnant pools of rot. The fish, once plentiful in the river, vanished, leaving behind only empty waters. And it wasn't just nature that had changed. The villagers themselves began to suffer from inexplicable misfortunes. Those who had been involved in the dam's construction fell ill, stricken by strange fevers, their bodies covered in dark blotches. The children, who had played beside the riverbanks, became restless and fearful, waking in the night with screams of terror. The air itself seemed thick with an unexplainable dread. It was then that the village elders, who had long known the ancient ways of appeasing the gods, finally spoke of the curse that had been unleashed upon them. The goddess, they said, was no ordinary spirit. She was the guardian of the river, a deity as old as the land itself, and she could not be reasoned with like other gods. She was not a benevolent protector, but a force of nature, one whose wrath could never be easily quelled. The dam, the very thing they had built in the hopes of controlling the river, had angered her to the point of no return. Now, the village would suffer her punishment. They spoke of an ancient myth, one passed down through generations, a story of the river goddess who once punished an entire village for daring to disrupt her sacred waters. In that myth, the river goddess had not only destroyed the village but had also cursed its people, condemning them to an eternity of misfortune and sorrow. The villagers who had dared to cross her had vanished, never to be seen again, and their descendants were doomed to live in her shadow. The elders warned that if the village did not act quickly, they too would fall victim to the same fate. The goddess had a method of punishing those who displeased her. She would slowly strip away everything the villagers held dear, one by one, until they were left with nothing. Their livelihoods, their homes, their families, and their very souls would all be claimed by the goddess' relentless vengeance. As days turned into weeks, and the floodwaters continued to rise, Ikena began to realize the full extent of what he had done. He had called upon the powers of the river to bend to his will, and now, in the wake of the destruction, he saw the terrible price that had to be paid. He sought guidance from the elders, but it was clear that their advice was already too late. The goddess had made her decision, and there was no turning back. But Ikena, desperate to redeem himself and save his people, began to search for a way to appease the goddess. He had heard whispers of an ancient ritual, one that had been used in times long past to atone for such grave offenses. This ritual, if performed correctly, could potentially break the curse and calm the wrath of the goddess. But the price of this ritual was steep, and the path to redemption would not be easy. Chapter 3: The Search for Redemption, a Dangerous Quest. The days grew darker as Ikena's determination to save his people deepened. The goddess had made her anger known, and the curse upon the village seemed to tighten with each passing day. The once vibrant fields now lay barren, the riverbanks were eerily silent, and the people suffered from the curse in different ways. Some fell ill, others lost loved ones, and a few even vanished into the mist. Desperation hung over the village like a thick fog, and Akena knew he had to do something, or risk losing everything. The elders spoke of an ancient ritual that could appease the goddess and lift the curse, but they also warned of its dangers. It was said to require the intervention of a powerful shaman who understood the ancient ways of the river goddess. This shaman would have to travel to the very heart of the river, where the goddess was believed to reside in the deep, sacred waters. It was a journey that no one had undertaken in living memory, a perilous trek that few survived. Akena knew that the shaman he needed was a man named Oloran, a reclusive figure who lived on the far side of the forest, beyond the mountains, in a cave that was said to be older than the village itself. Oloran was rumored to possess the wisdom of the ancestors, and he alone was said to understand the ways of the river goddess. But there was a catch: Oloran was known to be incredibly difficult to find, and his price for aid was high. Many had attempted to seek him out, only to return empty-handed, their hopes dashed. Despite the risks, Akena knew he had no choice. The village's survivor rested on finding Oloran, and he was willing to do whatever it took to bring the shaman back to the village. With the elders' blessing, Akena set off on the perilous journey, determined to save his people from the curse that had taken hold of them. The trek through the forest was treacherous. The path was overgrown, the air thick with humidity, and the sounds of strange creatures echoed through the trees. Akena pressed on, knowing that time was running out. Every step felt heavier than the last as the weight of the village's fate bore down on him. Along the way, Akena encountered signs of the goddess's wrath. The once untouched forest now seemed twisted and malevolent. Trees were uprooted, animals lay dead by the side of the trail, and even the skies above seemed to darken in warning. Akena couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, as though the river goddess herself was aware of his every move. Days passed, and Akena's supplies began to run low. The journey was taking a toll on him, but he refused to turn back. The fate of the village depended on his success, and he knew that failure was not an option. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, Akena reached the cave where Oloran was said to reside. The entrance to the cave was shrouded in darkness, and an eerie silence hung in the air. Akena hesitated for a moment, but then steeled himself and entered the cave. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ancient herbs, and the walls were covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Deep within the cave, he found Oloran, an old man with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages. His long, silver beard flowed like the river itself, and his presence exuded a sense of calm, despite the tension in the air. Oloran looked up at Akena with piercing eyes, as though he had been expecting him all along. "You seek the power to appease the goddess," Oloran said, his voice deep and resonant. "But you must understand, the river goddess is not one to be easily appeased. She is as old as the earth itself, and her wrath is not something that can be easily quelled. You must offer her something in return, something of great value." Akena nodded, understanding the gravity of what was being asked. "What must I offer, Oloran? What can undo the curse?" The old shaman stared at Akena for a long moment before responding. "You must make a sacrifice, one that comes from the heart. Only then will the goddess be moved to show mercy. The path to redemption is not an easy one, but it is the only way." Akena felt a surge of hope, but the road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. The sacrifice would not be simple, and the goddess would demand more than just a symbolic offering. It would require the village to give up something that was deeply cherished, something irreplaceable. But what could it be? What could the village give up to save themselves from the curse? As the answer loomed on the horizon, Akena knew the true test had only just begun. Chapter 4: The Ultimate Sacrifice, a Heart-Wrenching Decision. With Oloran's cryptic words echoing in his mind, Akena left the cave, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The old shaman's warning had been clear: the village would have to make a sacrifice so great that it would test the very spirit of the people. But what could be more precious than their lives, their culture, their homes. The journey back to the village was a long and arduous one, filled with more questions than answers. Ikena found himself haunted by the idea of what the goddess might demand. Would it be something material, like gold or land? Or something far more personal, a life, perhaps? The very thought of it sent shivers down his spine, but Ikena knew that there was no turning back. The curse was still upon the village, and without the goddess's favor, the suffering would only grow worse. When he returned to the village, Ikena gathered the elders and the villagers together in the heart of the community. The once thriving village square was now a somber place, with few people able to muster any semblance of hope. The river, once the lifeblood of the village, was now a cold and empty stream, a stark reminder of their desperate plight. "I have returned with news," Ikena began, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. "The journey was long, and the cost of salvation is high. The river goddess has made it clear that we must make a sacrifice. Something of great value must be offered, something that cannot be replaced." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Ikena's gaze swept across the faces of the villagers. Fear, confusion, and uncertainty were etched into every expression. They had already lost so much, what more could they be asked to give? "Will the goddess take our children?" a woman in the crowd asked, her voice trembling with fear. "What else can she want from us?" Ikena's heart clenched, and he shook his head. "No. She does not seek our children. But she does demand something that will be painful for all of us. We must give up something that is tied to our very identity, something that we hold dear." The villagers fell silent. It was as if they could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on them. What could they give that would satisfy the goddess? Would it be their land, their crops, their traditions? Or was it something even more fundamental, something more precious than anything they could imagine? "I will go to the river," an elder spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "The goddess must be appeased. I will offer my life to her, if that is what she demands." "No!" Ikena shouted, stepping forward in horror. "Your life is too precious. You have no right to make such a sacrifice. There must be another way." But the elder shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "We are all tied to the river, to the land. Our lives are but a moment in the great flow of time. If giving my life will save this village, then it is a price I am willing to pay." The villagers murmured, some in agreement, others in sorrow. It was clear that the elder had made up his mind. But Ikena couldn't accept it. He had already lost so much, he couldn't lose more, especially not someone like this elder, whose wisdom and experience were invaluable to the community. In the days that followed, Ikena gathered the village together for a council. He spoke with the elders, the warriors, and the healers, trying to come up with a solution that would fulfill the goddess's demand without asking anyone to pay the ultimate price. As the days stretched on, the pressure began to mount. Crops continued to wither, the river refused to flow, and the people grew weaker with each passing day. The curse was slowly choking the life out of the village, and Ikena knew that time was running out. They had to make a choice, soon. Then, on a quiet evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, an idea struck Ikena. It was simple yet profound. The village had to give up something symbolic, something that represented their bond with the river goddess. The sacrifice didn't need to be a life, it could be something that reflected their deep connection to the river and the land. Ikena proposed that they offer their most sacred artifact, the sacred river stone, a relic that had been passed down through generations. It was said to hold the blessing of the goddess herself, and it was the last tangible link the village had to their divine protector. The stone was kept in a shrine near the river, and it was revered as a symbol of prosperity and protection. The elders listened intently, and after much deliberation, they agreed that this could be the answer. The river stone represented the heart of the village, and its loss would be felt by everyone. But it was a loss that would symbolize the village's willingness to humble themselves before the goddess, to acknowledge their mistakes and seek her forgiveness. The decision was made. The entire village gathered by the riverbank the following morning, the sacred stone in hand. The river, though still quiet and still, seemed to respond to their presence, as if it, too, was waiting for the moment of sacrifice. Ikenna, with a heavy heart, placed the stone into the river, watching as it was slowly carried away by the current. For a moment, there was silence. Then, as if by magic, the water began to stir. The river's flow returned, and the curse began to lift. The crops began to bloom once more, and the villagers felt the weight that had been pressing down on them lift. The goddess had accepted their offering. But as the village rejoiced, Ikenna couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had been changed in the process. The river goddess had been appeased, but at what cost? The village would never be the same again, and neither would he. Chapter 5: The Goddess's Wrath and the Final Judgment. As the river stone disappeared beneath the surface, the villagers held their breath. The moment felt eternal, as if time itself had frozen. The wind stilled. The trees stopped swaying. Even the birds, which had not sung for days, seemed to watch in silent anticipation. Then, the river trembled. A low, guttural sound rumbled from the depth of the water, like an ancient force awakening after centuries of slumber. The current surged forward, filling the dry riverbed, rushing past the banks with unnatural speed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the once dormant waters roared back to life. But the villagers' relief was short-lived. From the heart of the river, the waters twisted and rose, forming a towering wave. It did not crash or break, it shaped itself. And then, she emerged. The river goddess. She was unlike anything they had imagined, her form shifting between beauty and terror. Her skin shimmered like water under the moonlight, her eyes swirling with the depth of the ocean itself. Where her feet should have been, the river's waves curled and frothed, as if she were an extension of the water itself. She was both enchanting and terrifying, a being neither fully of this world nor separate from it. Her voice echoed, layered with the sound of crashing waves and distant thunder. "You have offered your most sacred relic to seek my mercy." The villagers fell to their knees. Ikenna forced himself to remain standing, though every fiber of his being told him to kneel before the deity. He had to face her. He had to understand. The goddess turned her gaze upon him. "Do you think a single offering can wash away your sins? Do you believe a mere stone can cleanse the arrogance of mortals?" A cold dread gripped Ikenna's heart. The sacrifice had been accepted, yet there was no peace in her voice, only a lingering fury. The villagers began to weep, pleading for her forgiveness. Some prostrated themselves, pressing their foreheads to the wet earth, while others clung to one another, whispering desperate prayers. Then, the goddess raised her hand, and the river surged. The water reached for them, pulling at their feet, their ankles, hungry, vengeful. "You have defied the natural order." The waters twisted, rising higher, forming shadowy figures within the waves, the spirits of the drowned, the forgotten souls claimed by the river over centuries. Their hollow eyes bore into the villagers, their whispers mingling with the wind, a chorus of sorrow and judgment. Ikenna stepped forward. He had to speak. He had to try. "My lady," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "We did not seek to defy you. We were lost. We were desperate. We forgot the bond we once had with the river, and we have suffered for it. But we have learned. We have remembered. We humbly ask for your mercy." The goddess studied him, her expression unreadable. The waters around her stilled for a moment. Then, she spoke. "Mercy is not given. It is earned." She extended her hand, and a drop of water formed at her fingertip, glowing with an ethereal light. It fell into the river, sending ripples that glowed beneath the surface. "I will not destroy your village." A collective gasp of relief passed through the crowd. But then she continued. "But you will not forget again." The water surged once more, And before anyone could react, the river's current pulled away the eldest among them, the elder who had first offered himself as a sacrifice. He did not struggle. He did not scream. He simply closed his eyes and let the river take him. The villagers cried out in horror. Some tried to reach for him, but the waters would not allow it. Ikenna could only watch as the elder disappeared beneath the surface. Then, just as quickly as the chaos had begun, the river calmed. The water shimmered in the moonlight, as if the goddess had never been there at all. The villagers were left trembling on the banks, the weight of what had transpired settling upon them. The curse was lifted. The river had returned. Their village would live. But at a cost. And they would never forget. For the river goddess does not forgive. She remembers. The village survived. The river flowed once more, bringing life back to the land. Crops grew, the drought ended, and the people thrived. But something had changed forever. They did not celebrate their victory. There was no joy in their voices, only a quiet reverence, a deep understanding that their survival had come at a price. And from that day forward, they never neglected their offerings again. Even generations later, when the old stories faded into whispers, the villagers still gathered at the river's edge on the appointed days, placing gifts into the water. No one dared question the tradition. No one dared ignore it. Because every so often, when the river was silent, and the night was still, some swore they could hear a voice, soft as the breeze, deep as the current. For the river goddess never truly leaves. She only watches. And she never forgets. If you found this tale chilling, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more dark African folklore. What do you think? Was the river goddess justified, or was her punishment too harsh? Let us know in the comments.